So this is an interview done by Boris Johnson with, I believe, CNN. I think this has been reposted by The Guardian on YouTube. But he makes a couple crazy claims, or no, maybe not so crazy claims. We're going to analyze them about his European fellow counterparts, and how they felt about the war in the days leading up to it. I think it's a very interesting interview. We're going to break it down and analyze it.
In G7s, in leaders' meetings, did you find different countries were, to quote a predecessor of your, don't go wobbly?
This thing was a huge shock, right? We were all taken. I mean, we could see the Russian battalion tactical groups massing, but different countries had very different perspectives. I mean, be in no doubt that
I really don't think it was that much of a shock to most world leaders, which is surprising concerning like what he's about to say about the French. But I think especially the Americans and the UK and those in the military, like looking at Russia and the strategic outlook of Russia. Basically, Russia set on this path of this war with Ukraine years ago, almost nearly 8 years ago. Of course, you have the 2014 conflict that sprung up in the Donbass. Like since that happened and since Russia seized or Crimea, this was always going to turn out into a war. I guess you could say you're surprised about the timing of it, but I would suggest the timing of it was clearly the best timing of it. Coming out of COVID and all these big international stuff that's happening that makes it seem like the world's falling apart. The Russians probably assumed that the world would be mostly distracted, wouldn't really rally behind this Ukraine cause like they have. Obviously, that didn't really turn out like the Russians wanted, but I don't think anyone was really truly surprised. Considering all the people in the know.
The French were in denial right up to the last moment. The Germans, for all sorts of sound economic reasons, really didn't want it to. They were. I'll tell you a terrible thing. The German view was at one stage that if it were going to happen, which would be a disaster, then it were better for the whole thing to be over quickly and for Ukraine to fold.
So basically, what he's saying is the French were in complete denial. And then on top of that, the Germans, saw the situation as such a big disaster that they thought it would be best should Ukraine get defeated quickly, which a lot of people have called complete bullshit. And they're saying that Johnson's lying about that statement. Actually, I don't really think he's lying. I mean, this has been what a lot of people thought the strategic outlook of Germany has been for a long time. They've tied themselves to Russia in terms of oil and gas imports. The economic future of Germany very much is dependent upon cheap energy from Russia. So, in the case of Germany, of course, there's going to be parties in Germany that want the war to be over quickly. That way they can continue business with Russia as soon as possible, and the instability in between the exporter and the importer, Russia and Germany, and it's actually exporter and importer coming from both directions. So Russia's the exporter of raw materials, Germany's importing it, but then Germany then again exports finished products that Russia imports a lot of, actually. So they're very much economically integrated. Having a war in between them causes a lot of problems in terms of trade, and can affect Germany's economic future with other trade partners around the world. So I don't think it's that surprising that some people within Germany wanted that and probably still do want that. I don't think though that this Olaf Scholz government took that position too seriously. Maybe there was some business advocates within the government that were saying that, but it appears like Olaf Scholz and his government have been pretty pro-Ukraine from the beginning. However, looking at the number of weapons and aid that's been transferred, Germany has been pretty resistant to transferring heavy weapons and stuff. So that could, it could prove there could be some truth to that.
And I couldn't support that. I thought that was a disastrous way of looking at it. But I can understand why they thought and felt as they did. I remember
he's saying it's disaster. He think it's a disastrous way of looking at it for the British and the Americans should the Germans decide to take that path, obviously, because that would mean the Germans are doing what's best for them, and what's best for them is not what's best for the UK or the US, specifically the UK. I think the UK is definitely the main outside supporter of Ukraine that has the most, or one of the largest interests in Ukraine becoming victorious in the conflict. Obviously, the Baltic states and Poland are in that camp as well. They have probably much bigger interest than the UK does, but I would say that the combined power of all those states isn't as big as the UK. So the UK is the main outside power that wants a Ukrainian victory. The US is just very much aligned with the UK, and very much still in that daddy role of the world, where we think we have to step in and get involved with all these conflicts. So we have different motives, but we don't really have any strategic objectives or needs within the Ukrainian and post-Russian space. There's nothing that could have happened in Ukraine or in the Baltics or Poland that would actually physically hurt the US back home. So while it might be the goals of a certain administration, they're never going to be as committed to it as the United Kingdom is.
Again, massively dependent on Russian hydrocarbons. At one stage, simply saying, that they would be unable to support the position we were taking. But then what happened was, everybody, Germans, French, Italians, everybody, Joe Biden, saw that there was simply no option, because you couldn't negotiate with this guy. That's the key point. That's where the logic all breaks down when people call for a negotiated solution. There is no deal. He's not offering one. He doesn't even want one.
Which takes me to this.
And Zelensky isn't in a position to do one. His people wouldn't let him.
So, I would disagree with him there. I think, it's pretty clear, pretty obvious that Russia did offer a deal at the beginning of the war, and the deal that they offered was basically, Ukraine never enters NATO, and they recognize the Donbass and the Crimea as being independent from Ukraine or part of Russia. In the case of Crimea, Russia had already annexed it. They wanted Ukraine to recognize that it was annexed. That way the rest of the world can recognize it. Of course, if Ukraine recognizes that they don't control their own territory anymore, then the rest of the world, there's no point in saying, no, that's Ukrainian. If the Ukrainians don't say it's Ukrainian, then America or the Britain can't say it's Ukrainian. And then with the Donbass, I believe they wanted independence for the Donbass, which they would have eventually probably folded back into Russia. Now, whether there's been some debate on that, whether or not it was specifically they wanted the unoccupied parts of Lugansk and Donetsk to fall into that category as well. I would think probably yes, but there's a chance that it was no, or probably could have been negotiated. And overall, considering what's happened since that deal was offered, hundreds of thousands of people on both sides are dead. You have much more territory than what we were talking about in the beginning that is being occupied by Russia, and there's no chance that they're going to give it up, through political settlement now at this point. Considering everything that's happened, that's probably would have been a good idea for the Ukrainians to take that deal. It would have stopped a lot of death. It would basically there would be a better status quo for Ukraine now than there was at the beginning of that war, right? The main factor that prevented that from happening was the deal that Ukraine would remain out. NATO remained neutral. The West saw that as basically Russia interfering in NATO affairs, saying, if the official NATO line is everyone has the right to self-determination and to make a decision whether they want to join or not themselves. Russia obviously doesn't care about those things. They see Ukraine joining NATO as very destabilizing, and honestly, at this point, there's probably no chance that Ukraine ever could join NATO anyways. So it was more or less the principle of saying they wouldn't be allowed to join NATO that has led to hundreds of thousands of people dead, because there was nothing that Ukraine would have been giving up in that deal that they didn't already not have control over. So I think that's the main reason why a lot of people are upset with Zelensky and upset with the West. Of course, people have many more reasons and rights to be upset with Russia for basically starting the conflict. But should Zelensky have taken the deal, it would be a lot better situation in the world than it is right now. So ultimately, everyone has responsibilities for their own actions. So while Russia is responsible for entering the territory of Ukraine, Ukraine had certain things that they could have taken responsibility for and changed the outcome of history. But obviously there's people who disagree with me, and there's people that thinks that opinion is outrageous. But it's my opinion. All right, guys, thanks for watching this one. I'll see you on the next one.